Okay, good evening, everyone. Just hold on while I get everything set up and squared away so we can get going. Know this is a little unexpected, but why not? This is not working. Hold on. That's server not what I want. That's what I want. Again, just bear with me. This does not seem to be working very well. Huh. So far, so good. Okay, good evening, everyone. This is an unexpected sort of random video. I've been meaning to do this for quite a while. We've been having some technical issues at home. This isn't really a studio type of video to do. But I think I've got everything set up now to be able to do it. So, what I've been meaning to do for a while, actually, is just to give some of my thoughts and opinions and observations, I guess you might say, on ethics, morality, and more precisely the nature of good and evil. Particularly, this has been inspired by a lot of videos I've been watching from various atheists and agnostics about what's the nature of morality? Is it possible to be moral and to be an atheist? And certainly, I think the answer overwhelmingly there is yes. And then, of course, questions about, well, if you can be good about God, what's the point of religion, which is a completely separate subject. But yes, I do think, but here, more specifically, is is an idea that I've seen a lot of atheists put forward. I agree with, but I think there's a flaw, and I'm going to explain the flaw in a minute. But the idea is that basically, we have a basic concept of morality that comes out of the idea of compassion. This is also something that's probably actually written into our genes, because you see most social species in the wild have some basic levels of compassion for each other, and there's a baseline of ethics and morality that you find even in the animal kingdom. Which is to me an absolutely fascinating question. The concept, I mean, the atheist answer, of course, is that this is a product of evolution, and proves you don't need, morality is something hardwired into us. Exceptions, of course, being sociopaths, psychopaths, people who, for whatever neurological or other reason, don't have the capacity to feel compassion and empathy. But that basically it's proof that you don't need God. You don't need a God to have a moral code in a broader sense. Personally, I tend to, as I've said many times on this channel, as a theistic evolutionist, I tend to think this is God writing the idea of, okay, apparently there's an issue with the echo. Let me see what I can do. Hold on. Okay, now. No, it may very well be me, Baron. I'm trying something different that hopefully will improve the situation. There we go. Let's see. Does this work? Testing 1 2 3. Get anybody in the chat confirm with me? Does this sound better? Okay, awesome. So we'll do it this way. So, um, yeah, okay, cool. So the basic concept I've seen put forward among atheists, and I think this is a good. Don't get me wrong. I see a very large problem with it, but I think on the whole this is a very good concept. Is that the core of morality or ethics in humans is the idea of being compassionate towards other humans. I'm not faulting this as an idea. Certainly, we need to be compassionate towards each other, but there is a flaw in it to me insofar as this. What about justice? I think most of us have at least an inherent idea that people guilty need punishment, if not necessary, or you know, okay, let me give you an example of what I mean specifically. So, you have someone who commits murder. Now, on the simplest side of it, from a purely materialistic view, without getting into greater philosophical end of the world type of things, you have compassion. It's like, okay, so you don't necessarily need compassion for the murder victim; they're dead. But now, what do you do with the murderer? I mean, from a purely, and I mean, you can certainly make a case as well for the victim's family, but you know, most people I think have an inherent belief that you need to do something about the man who just committed murder. Christopher Ryan commenting in chat: justice exists to prevent continued wrongdoing. Justice versus revenge argument, though, and that's true. I'm not talking about revenge, but when most of us have an inherent sense, in my opinion, that when someone does something wrong, there needs to be consequence. Particularly, if nothing else, this works for some of the more sociopathic members of society, with the sense of, yeah, you don't do certain things because there are legal consequences to doing certain things. Certainly, I am personally a believer in the idea that crimes do merit punishment. Certainly, and this is an ancient idea that's found throughout human society. Certainly, there's certainly a punishment needs to fit the crime, which is an idea that's been dealt with out of whack throughout human history, and a more complicated issue of what was I thinking? The capital punishment, things like that. Hey, Lord Ruin, long time no see. But the nature of capital punishment and eye for an eye and things like that. And that's not necessarily what I'm talking, or for that matter, people who are mentally ill, people who are mentally deficient, below average intelligent. And yes, I am up quite late, which is actually pretty normal for me. I couldn't sleep. I decided to do this video I've been meaning to do. But the point is, most of us have an inherent sense that when you do something wrong, there should be a consequence to what you do. Just like if you do something right, generally speaking. We as a species, we tend to be sort of wired for reward punishment. And from a purely compassionistic viewpoint, I don't think that necessarily works that well. But yeah, as Chris Ryan says in chat, any kind of punishment is meant to act as a display of consequence to prevent anyone from being driven to do any act against societal law or moral law. And specifically, that's what I'm talking about is more moral law, and societal law as well. Mostly is what we're talking about. But there is a concept that you do something wrong. Most of us have an inherent sense of justice that when someone does something wrong, there's a consequence to that action. Which is the entire reason we have a court system and a legal system, as well as, for that matter, if you're dealing with a serial killer, obviously you don't want to leave them on the streets where they're going to do it again. But the problem is, in a purely compassionate, in a morality based purely on the idea of compassion, there's no room for that. Case in point, let's look at a serial killer. there is and I always forget which is which, but of psychopaths and sociopaths, one is something you're born with, the other one is something that's developed through severe abuse. You know, you could make an argument about, well, what about compassion for this person who's gone through decades of severe abuse that's turned them into what they are? Um, which ultimately, again, I'm not saying compassion's a bad thing, and certainly there is a place in justice, I think, for compassion, but the action should have consequences, and a purely compassionistic worldview doesn't necessarily encompass that. So then, how do we define moral and immoral, or good and evil? That's a question that ethical philosophers, have been debating since pretty much the beginning of the human race. And which I think Christopher Ryan again is getting into an interesting question. Evil exists to do wrong, not so much for the idea that consequence is beneath them, but the choice to explicitly violate morality for the sake of violation, not for their own enrichment, but for the sake of the destruction of morality. Which actually gets into a very interesting concept I actually want to talk about. One of my favorite philosophers of ethics, Immanuel Kant. Kant basically had two major ways of defining if an action was ethical or not. One is extremely I like it, but it's incredibly problematic. The other one I like much better, and I don't think it's as problematic. The first is universalism. It's you can only consider an action moral or ethical if you could turn it into a universal ethical principle that applies in all situations. Now, this on the simplest level sounds good, because this means under no circumstances an act of murder justified, because that you can go ahead and commit murder would never be an ethical law in any sane person's idea of morality. Here's where this idea is problematic, though. Most of us would generally agree that thou shalt not lie is generally a pretty good rule. But most of us would also agree there's exceptions to that as an ethical rule. For example, lying about somebody attacking you, lying about somebody who's stealing from you is wrong. No Herr SS officer, I have not seen any Jews today, is a pretty morally supportable lie. So his idea, but under Kant's very hard rule of universalism, it doesn't work, because you would have to elevate the idea of lying into a universal rule, which no rational person is going to do. Thou shalt lie as a moral command imperative. This is now the other side of his ethical philosophy, which I think does make sense, is utilitarianism, and specifically the concept that for an action to be ethical, you should always treat people as having their own worth. More precisely, we're talking about you never treat a person as a means to an end. You treat them as an independent being that has their own inherent moral self, or their own inherent self-worth, which I think is a very good moral rule. Actions, it's hard to think of an action that doesn't treat that doesn't fit that rule, that's immoral, or that many immoral actions that rule would accept. I mean, slavery is clearly immoral under that rule. Murder is most forms of murder are certainly immoral under that rule. Lying is generally immoral under that rule, though lying to save somebody's life. Yet, no, I haven't seen any Jews today is certainly moral, because you're respecting someone else's right to exist. But another concept that he gets into that I think is very interesting, that gets into the more immediate discussion of the nature of evil, is he has this concept of what he calls ultimate evil, or sometimes they call it diabolical evil. So the concept here is, for humans to commit an evil act, for humans to do something we consider immoral, we need a justification. We have a justification. There's the reason most people do evil, which is, You get pleasure from it, revenge, there's some justification for it. But there's also extraordinary evil or diabolical evil, which is evil for the sake doing something evil for the sake of doing something evil. And Kant argued that this was outside of human ability. Humans always have, and I tend to agree with him, that humans always have a reason why we do things. That's more complicated than we're doing something wrong just because it's wrong. The conceptually, the idea of pure evil, which I think is what we're getting at, the idea of doing things that are immoral just because they're immoral, he would relegate to the demonic and spiritual beings. I'm not even sure they're entirely capable of it. I think when you look at least my view of demons and devils, they have deeper motivations of evil for evil's sake. It's a rebellion against God. It's a way of demeaning the human soul because they hate humans. It gives them personal pleasure because one of the best arguments I've ever seen for saying, if we take it as true that Satan is damned to hell and going there for all of eternity, well, why is he dragging other people down with him? Well, he's dragging other people down with him because if I'm going down, you're all going down with me. Misery loves company. So I'm not personally sure that evil in its purest form, evil for the sake of being evil, is possible. Because there's always some petty motivation. There's almost always seems to be some petty motivation for an evil act, even if it's only because you take pleasure, a sadistic pleasure in inflicting pain. But here's another idea, and this we're going to get a little into C.S. Lewis, who I think had some of the most interesting ideas about morality. Specifically in his book Mere Christianity, which he suggested an idea, and it's not unique to Lewis, and it's older than Lewis, so I don't know exactly who proposed it originally, that good is its own thing. Good is altruism, it's selflessness, it's compassion, it's justice. Evil is not its own thing. Good can exist without evil, but evil cannot exist without good. And the reason why evil cannot exist without good is that evil is a perversion of what's good. And I think there's a lot of truth to this. When you look at a lot of, like, if you look at the classic Seven Deadly Sins, I think at the core most of them represent something good taken to extremes. Sexual desire is not immoral. If all sexual desire ceased to exist, we as a species would die out really quickly because we wouldn't be producing any more. Lust isn't normal sexual desire, though. It's sexual desire that's gone too far. It's sexual desire that is dominating your life. Gluttony, the pleasure in consumption, isn't. We need to eat, and there's a number of psychological and medical reasons why for the positive reactions we get from eating. But when consumption, not just eating necessarily, but consumption as a whole, dominates your life and it becomes gluttony, it becomes unhealthy. Pride's another really good example. You need a sense of self-worth is important. It's not inherently evil to do, and I'll get back to you, Lord Ruin, in a second. It's not inherently evil to have a sense of self-worth and a pride in your accomplishments, but there's pride that becomes arrogance and thinking you're better than everyone else. Lewis is very interesting on pride in that he thinks where the six other deadly sins are human nature, he thinks pride is born of hell because it's central to so much sin. I mean, pride is what causes Lucifer's sin, and it's so difficult to defeat, and it's so inherently unhealthy. Lord Ruin comments that Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker, was sure dedicated to evil for the sake of evil. I'm not sure that's true. Like he was associated. I mean, he's a serial killer. He's a sociopath or psychopath. I don't know which. Um, I think there's an inherent pleasure. Most serial killers that I've studied and most thought about serial killers derive gratification from murder, and usually take gratification from pain and the infliction of pain on others. That's not evil for evil's sake. It's evil for it's almost a dark side of hedonism. Which, for anyone who doesn't know, properly hedonism is an ethical philosophy where you seek pleasure and avoid pain. Um, in more ethical forms of hedonism, you avoid inflicting pain on others while pursuing your own pleasure, which somewhat gets into Epicureanism. But he did things. I mean, he did things for more than. And yes, he did make his victims swear their souls to Satan. But again, as I think Christopher Ryan has pointed out in chat as well, because that fed into his pride and his feeling, which he felt was better than any other sensation. He had the point being he had reasons for what he was doing. He wasn't just committing evil acts for the sake of being evil. I don't think. I mean, I don't know for certain. You don't know for certain. Nobody knows except Richard Ramirez himself really knows why he did what he did. But from what I know, the pathology of serial killers, none of them really do it just for this. They don't kill people just to kill people. Like, generally speaking, actually, the mindset of serial killers is similar to the mindset of rapists. And generally speaking, they do it for reasons related to. That's an interesting one, Lord Ruin. I'll get back to it in a second. But they do it because they're sadists. They derive gratification and pleasure from the infliction of pain. Lord Ruin comments, love is the sole moral imperative, and that's SOUL, not SOLE, and all of their morals are derived from it. I think, going further, say, selfless, charitable, non-erotic, brotherly love, spiritual love, love of the soul, which I think gets into the idea of compassion. Personally, the interesting question I've seen raised about the nature of love is good is there are some situations where people have gotten into well, actually it's interesting to discuss this. No, actually, Christopher Ryan, I'll get back to that, but that's a common misconception, the idea that rape is act out of a sense of dominance. That's one reason why they do what they do. There's actually there's 4 reasons. There's generally speaking 4 categories of rapists that have slightly different motivations. Domination is one of the most common, it's not the only one. But one of the arguments I've seen raised against love is overbearing and controlling parents. Even potentially Munchausen's, although I think Munchausen's is a very poor example, just because in Munchausen's I think ultimately the act is more about the person indulging their own selfish desire, not any sense of love for the person. But to get back to Lord Ruin's, Christopher Ryan's point that rape is an act of dominance. So there's basically 4 major types of, 4 major classifications of motivation for rape. Dominance is one most common. Revenge is another very common one, and isn't necessarily revenge against the person being raped. It's revenge against revenge against someone else. Like, for example, the rapist has deep-seated anger issues with their mother and goes out and rapes women that are reminding him of his mother. Another version, actually, people always say rape isn't motivated by sex. There's one that sort of is. There are at least a handful of rapists that feel, for whatever reason, that they're not entitled. They're incapable of getting a sexual partner and do rape because of that, and because of their own petty internal issues. Um, the most dangerous type of rapist, and the one that overlaps probably the most directly with serial killers, is what's known as a sadistic rapist. Some rapists rape just because they take sexual gratification from the infliction of pain. Um, uh, Anger rapists, the ones that often rape because remind them of issues with their mother. They can't work them out with the mother or their sisters. They work it out on a stranger. Are very dangerous, but by far the sadists know they're going to torture their victims. They may very likely kill their victims. Anything the victim does to fight them back is just going to fuel their anger, fuel the sadism, and inspire them to do worse. Um, so it's one of the things when people talk about, you should always fight, you should always run. It depends very much on the type of. It's a little more complicated than that. Dealing with how you should handle the situation depends very much on the sort of rapist you're dealing with. And a common piece of bad advice that's frequently given out, by the way, um, the whole, what if I was your mother's sister, whatever, is a terrible idea because there are a number of rapists out there that are raping because of issues they have with mom or sister, and they're projecting that. You may very well be suggesting that you are the person that they're projecting onto you. And Ted Bundy very much was sadistic. I mean, he tortured his victims pretty horrifically. But I think, in general, I think that Lewis is right that evil is a twisting, a perversion, a predation on what's good. It's not. You can't have something that's evil by itself, which is what also gets into this idea I was talking about pure evil doesn't, pure evil can't exist because there's always a motivation for it. People don't do, people can do some, it's very rare in humans and probably mostly in God, but something can be done for purely altruistic reasons. You can do something just because it's the right thing. Nobody does anything just because it's the wrong thing. They may think they are, but there's ultimately emotional reasons behind it. I think in general, I would say that for an action to be evil, it does require it. To be honestly evil, it requires the ability to have intent, and that most evil, that intent is what paints an act. Is what I'm. Yes, as Christopher Ryan said, by and large, what I am saying is that intent paints the act. There's a reason why the road to hell is paved with good intentions, is a saying. Actions that come out of virtuous, that honestly come out of virtuous motivation, I don't think are evil. Or at least it's very hard to think. Case in point, as Lord Ruin keeps coming up with agapism, the idea that all actions come out, all good, true good comes out of love. Honest, true love doesn't generally lead to evil action. Jealousy certainly can. But jealousy is a perversion. It's not, love is not in and of itself jealous. It's possessive. It's getting into possessiveness. It's taking that and twisting it. Another really interesting point I wanted to touch on with all of this that Lewis brings up and I agree with, and another thing a lot of other YouTubers I've watched disagree with, is I think even if we take God out of the equation, I think you can make a reasonable case that objective morality exists. Lewis, in fact, uses this as an argument for the existence of God. I think from a scientific standpoint, you make an argument that this is based on genetics. But I do think an objective morality exists that people do understand on a fundamental level. And people will argue, particularly I've seen a lot of atheists argue this because cultural standards of morality differ wildly. But there are certain core concepts that we all understand on a fundamental level. The golden rule probably being the most famous way of putting it. one of the more famous ways of putting morality, I think, is not unique to Christianity. It can be found, and I'll get back to this, in a wide range of other religions. But it's found in just about all of them in one way or another. And I'll go through them in a minute. But more fundamentally, we all have a fundamental understanding that murder, rape, lying, theft, I think everyone on the planet understands these things to be wrong on some level. I think even sociopaths and psychopaths haven't, even if they don't they don't care. And then here's a critical thing: it's not that they don't understand what they're doing is wrong; it's that they don't care. Lord Ruin saying moral absolutionism, sort of, in that there are certain basic concepts that I think are moral absolutes. Cold-blooded, I don't think there's anybody that's going to say cold-blooded murder is a morally acceptable idea in any culture. Or that stealing, that stealing as a whole, or specifically stealing without need, is a moral act in any culture. Where this gets interesting, and where you get the fact that there are differentiations between cultures, is what we all tend to agree on this inherent core of actions being moral. We're really good as a species and as individuals at coming up with reasons why it's okay for us to do it this time. And you find this throughout history. The conquistadors came to Mesoamerica and murdered Aztecs and the Aztecs and other indigenous cultures and stole their gold. Did they not know that this was morally wrong? No, they did, but they found a way to justify it. Lord Wynn saying most actions, not all are inherently good or evil. Inherently evil. I think there are certain actions that are inherently evil. Killing someone. There are instances where taking another person's life is, I would say, morally justified. Self-defense being the most obvious. To protect someone else, a cop shooting a mass shooter before he can shoot another victim is certainly morally justified. But yes, justifying one's actions to oneself doesn't make it good. But while we have this inherent idea that these things are inherently wrong, we're really good at justifying to ourselves why it's okay this time to do it, which is my point. Is that it isn't that we don't understand the action is wrong, it's that we're good at making it okay for us to do it this time. Ironically, because of the way the human mind works, it's okay for us to do it in this circumstance, but it's still not okay for anyone to do it to us. My point, though, is while we're very good at coming up with excuses for what we do, we still have an inherent I think all of us across cultures have an inherent understanding that certain actions are just wrong. I don't know of a culture which, on a cultural level, says that cold-blooded, premeditated murder is a morally acceptable act in any circumstance. Rape in general is something on a societal level people see as wrong. There are plenty of societies and religions and cultures that find exceptions to that, and exceptions to all of these things. But there's still an inherent understanding of what most people, I think, have a conscience, and most, if not all people, maybe I'm wrong, maybe not everyone does, which is why I'm hedging my bets here, not saying everyone. But we have an inherent sense of conscience, an inherent sense of that we're doing something wrong. We just unfortunately also have a rational mind that's really good at making exceptions. This is also, I think, why as a rule, animals aren't capable of proper evil, because they don't. Although that's an interesting question of itself, because certainly there are animals that are inherently cruel and do sadistic things that don't serve a purpose. Cats, for example, domestic house cats are responsible for something like 14% of all extinctions in mammals, reptiles, and birds. They're known when you let your cat. Anyone out there who doesn't know this, don't let your cat wander around outside, especially if you haven't spayed or neutered them. Um, they have a really bad habit of killing birds, even past the point they've satiated their hunger, but they'll still keep killing. Um, and it's not unique to house cats. The entire Felidae family kill for pleasure. They torture their prey. There's a reason cat and mouse is a cliche in our society. Cats like to play with their prey. They take pleasure from tormenting their prey, even when they're done eating. That it's not territoriality. Another example to get off the cat's family, dolphins. Oh, good heavens, dolphins. They will beat porpoises to death, and as far as researchers have ever found, it's because porpoises are a little like dolphins, but not quite. Um, Essentially, there seems to be evidence that dolphins are capable of racism. As bizarre a concept as that is to me. Um, on top of that, they've been known to and I hate to say it, but they've been known to rape porpoises and even occasionally humans to death. Just drag them, masturbate on them, drag them down, and drown them. Um, so maybe there is some evil in the animal kingdom. I honestly don't know, but there's certainly actions even animals commit that most of us would see morally wrong because it's self gratification for pain. Lord would ask my opinion on LaVeyan ethics. Um, I tend to find LaVey's idea of ethics somewhat silly. All due respect to Chris Ryan, who said in chat that he actually follows those. Because the thing I've always seen with LaVey is, although in fairness, I've seen at least one reasonable justification for it from one of the higher members of the Church of Satan. But it's the do what you want, but don't do this. And it's like, well, if you're really saying, because the core of LaVeyan Satanism is that is the glorification of the human nature, and then putting restrictions on those not attacking children, not attacking animals, not doing all these various other things. Well, certainly I agree. People shouldn't do those things. It just logically it doesn't make sense to me. Why do you make these lines? That isn't. How would Lou think? What would Lou think of this conversation? That is an interesting question. But this, and in fact, it was with Lou. It was way back in the day on the radio show. Lou and I had the conversation with the Satanist where I got into this. And the thing you run into is the one argument I've seen, and it seems like a reasonable argument, is if you take Satanism as Epicureanism or a form of basically a light form of hedonism. Well, seek pleasure, avoid pain. Do you really want to go to jail? And it's a basic reason why you shouldn't commit blatantly criminal actions, because if you commit these blatantly criminal actions, you're going to go to jail for them. At least most of us don't find that pleasurable. Again, I personally find, I just find, LaVey in general I find very amusing just because he was a showman who was really in it to get laid. I mean, he admitted as much himself. And so I find it very hard to take him seriously for that. But here's something I did want to go into, which I think goes to what I'm saying about we all have an inherent sense of ethics. So from the Talmud, this is from Tirukul, from around 200 BC, before current era to 500 current era, says, "Do not do to others what thou hast hurt yourself." Why does one hurt others, knowing what it is to be hurt? In ancient Greece, avoid doing what you would blame others for doing. From Thales, what you do not want to happen to you, do not do it yourself either. From Sextus the Pythagorean, do unto others do not do unto others that which angers you when they do it to you. Um, from ancient Persia, Zoroastrianism, whatever is disagreeable to yourself, do not do unto others. Ancient, well, let's get off of that whole area. Um, to go a bit Old Testament Bible, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your kinfolk. Love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:18. But getting off of the West, and of course the classic Christian, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. To quote Islam, because of how demonized it typically is. So I think it's worth quoting them on this. None of you believes until he wishes for his brother what he wishes of himself. Seek for mankind of which you are desirous for yourself, that you may be a believer. Baha'i, son of man, deny not my servant should he ask anything from ye, for his face is my face. Be then abashed before me. Hinduism. One should never do that to another which one regards as injurious to one's own self. This is in brief the rule of Dharma, and what other behavior is due to selfish desires. If the entire Dharma could be said in a few words, then it is this: that which is unfavorable to us, do not do that to others. Buddhism. Comparing oneself to others in such terms as just as I am, so are they, just as they are, so am I. He should neither kill nor cause others to kill. One who, while himself seeking happiness, oppresses with violence other beings who desire happiness will not attain happiness hereafter. Jainism, a man should not wander about treating all creatures as himself would be treated. Sikhism, precious like jewels are the minds of all. To hurt them is not all good. If thou desirest thy beloved, then hurt not anyone's heart. Confucius, what you do not wish for yourself, do not do to others. Taoism, regards your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. Do as thou wilt, lest it harm none, from Wicca, which is a much more recent concept. But there's an inherent agreement, in my opinion, on a cultural level across the world, on this basic concept of that we need to be kind to each other, that we need to treat each other the way that we want to be treated. Personally, for the core of my ethics, I tend to favor the very simple ethics of Jesus Christ: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Be kind to each other. I think it's a pretty good rule to start with. Just try to be kind, to act in kindness to others, and to treat others the way you would want to be treated. Just because if you aren't going to like it, other people there are obviously exceptions to this, but as a general rule, if you don't like, other people probably aren't going to like either. There are a lot of other ways of looking at ethics. I think is an absolutely fascinating subject. But generally speaking, I think most of the world can agree on it's the idea of seeking pleasure, avoiding pain. There's of course the idea of there's various other ideas, most of which have problems. Lord Owen asked my opinions on nihilism. Nihilism is another one I find really weird, that life is unless not there exactly what it says. Life is meaningless. There's no importance. There's no relevance to the universe. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. I haven't studied it extensively, but on what little I know of it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Um, but I do think, on its surface, it, as a code to live by, the golden rule works pretty well. I mean, although again, I don't think. I guess overall, I think the idea. I tend to favor. Um, doesn't nihilism say there's no such thing as good or evil, right or wrong? I don't. Yeah, I think you're right, and I don't agree with that. I think there is. I don't. As I said, um, I don't think evil exists as an independent thing. I think it's inherently a twisting and perversion of what's good. Um, but I wouldn't say that there's no such thing as good or obviously being a Christian and being a demonologist, I decidedly wouldn't say there's no such thing as good or evil, or that any action is more good or more evil than any other their action. I tend to favor also to some extent the idea of the greatest good for the greatest many to a point. Just in dealing on a societal level, there are a lot of very interesting questions in ethics that arise, about killing if you to save many and things of that nature. And I hate to say it, well, certainly I'm not going to take Thanos in the recent Avengers a position that we need to kill half the universe's population to get things back in balance. I do think there are sometimes you have that be acting in the sense of trying to preserve as many lives as possible is a good idea. Of course, another question coming out of all this is what's my opinion of dualism. I find dualism, and particularly Zoroastrianism, pretty interesting. For anyone who doesn't know, this, unlike nihilism, I'm actually more familiar with. Dualism is the belief that the universe, particularly as represented in Zoroastrianism and certain Christian heresies and sects that were probably influenced by Zoroastrianism, that there are two equal but opposite beings running the universe. In Zoroastrianism, specifically, you have Ahura Mazda, who is good, the god of good, and then you have Ahriman, or Angry Mayu, who is the god of evil. That he's the evil incarnate. The flaw I see is, like I said, it's an interesting idea. I don't agree with it because, as I said, I don't see evil. I don't agree with the idea of evil as an independent thing. So to have something that's evil incarnate doesn't make rational sense to me. It doesn't make sense that something would do something wicked just for the sake of doing something wicked. I think even, coming from a Judeo-Christian background, I think even sin has deeper motivations than I'm going to be bad because it's bad, or I'm going to rebel against God just because I want to rebel against, just because it's rebelling against God. There's some, the simplest argument for why sin does what he does is to prove his point. And yes, Lord, and I would agree that certainly dualism, while I don't think it makes sense, I personally don't think it makes sense, it does make for some neat movies and books. And it's interesting, I think, to note that a lot of people misunderstand Christianity as being dualistic, where mainstream Christianity really isn't. Certainly, first and more modern Gnostic sects are an exception to this, but historic Gnostic sects in particular tended in the first, second century, tend to be very dualistic, with the demiurge, who was the creator, and basically you had the creator of the spiritual world and the creator of the physical world. The creator of the spiritual world was good, the creator of the physical world is evil. It has certainly, in its original forms, has some serious problems. For example, in traditional first century Gnosticism, the God of the Old Testament, the Bible, is evil and created everything that is material, whereas Jesus represents the good God that created everything that's spiritual, which has some fairly unpleasant things about Judaism, in my opinion. that they're basically worshiping an evil being. But the idea that these are two, and it's a common mistake in Christianity, particularly among non-Christians. Though Christians make this mistake too of seeing God and Satan in constant war with each other, which would realistically be a short war because you have an all-powerful being God and you have a created being, very powerful created being who has limited power, Satan. It's like if the two of them got into a knockdown drag out fight, it's going to be squat. Which is why more properly I agree with C.S. Lewis's idea that the actual opposite of Satan isn't God, it's the Archangel Michael. Which raises its own interesting questions about the nature of Satan. And I guess this is a relevant time to talk about it. The nature of Satan's rebellion. And why did he rebel? I mean, there's a lot of different theories about the rebellion. Probably the best known is the Satan wanted to be God. Another very common one that's become popular lately, particularly with TV show Supernatural, is that Satan was jealous of man's greater role in the universe after the creation of Adam and Eve, which, asking if I'd have Carl Stone on my show. For a start, Lord Ruin, I'd have to know who Carl Stone is. Maybe, since I have absolutely no idea who that is, I don't know if I'd have him on or not. I do have a number of guests coming up. I can't talk about all of them, but I can't talk about most of them, actually. Let's just say I have, we're currently poking him. Oh, Carrie Stone. She apparently filled in for Lou when he had his back injury. I didn't know about that, actually. Actually, I don't really know her. I guess I could try to look her up and try to have her on. I'm going to need to get going soon because my laptop is dying because it's not being charged. But yikes. But I don't know, that's a possibility. Let me wrap this up since I've got about 6 minutes of juice left on the laptop. And this may be a discussion I revisit at some point to get into Satan's motivations and other subjects I haven't talked about. But this is going to wrap it up for tonight. I want to thank everybody for listening. Remember to tune in tomorrow night, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You'll be able to hear it right here on YouTube live. You'll be able to call in if you like. We have a brand new sponsor. I'm going to be unrolling tomorrow. That's something to dig up at some point. The recording of Lou's voice, but so tomorrow we're actually going to have a guest. It's a friend of mine, Amy Whitehouse. So as I've referred to a couple of times on the radio show, next month, and by next month I actually basically mean next week, I am going to be appearing at Blackthorn Steampunk, which is a very cool event going on in the Catskill Mountains of New York. I'm going to be doing 3 things. I'm going to be doing a lecture on the history of voodoo. I'm going to be doing a magic act, and I'm going to be doing campfire ghost stories around an actual campfire. Should be an enormous amount of fun, but we're going to have Amy on to talk about that. I don't know if that'll run the whole hour or if we'll get into something else, but that's going to be the topic for tomorrow night. And of course we'll have a show next week. We got topic to be decided, probably either voodoo like we've been talking about or going back to witches. If Drew could make it. Drew is going to try to make it tomorrow as well. We don't know for sure. It depends on his work schedule. Certainly, folks, I want to thank everybody for listening in. Remember to check it out tomorrow night. Also, if you haven't yet, please like, comment, and subscribe. Otherwise, that's going to be it for tonight. I want to thank everybody in the chat for coming in and hanging out with me so late at night. Have a good night, all. Good night, and God bless.